Welcome to the Exceptional Sales Leader Podcast with Darren Mitchell. If you're a sales leader looking to take your leadership to a whole new level, then this is the podcast for you. We'll be exploring tips, techniques, and strategies to help you take your leadership to the exceptional level and allow you to enjoy more money, more meaning, and better sales results. Welcome back to the Exceptional Sales Leader Podcast, and may I say, a very special situation happening today because the man that I'm about to introduce is the first three-time guest on the Exceptional Sales Leader Podcast, Mr. Doug C. Brown from New Hampshire in the US, CEO Sales Strategies. How are you, my friend?
I am awesome, and I am honored to be the first person that's been able to be invited back three times. I really mean that. I'm like super grateful.
It's and look, it's it's fantastic that you're able to come back on. It's and I don't say that lightly because I've got a lot of respect for you and what you've done in your career and what you're currently doing in the space of sales. And I've had some great conversations with your daughter Rebecca. And we got talking and said, hey, we need to get Doug back on because you're continuing to make things happen globally. You just said before we press record that you've made an acquisition, which is really exciting. You're about to launch a SaaS product. We've also got a program out. This is a mathematical-based sales, I guess, sales excellence program, for want of a better term, that helps us double our sales. So, mate, as we always know on this podcast, we don't know what direction we're going to go in, but we'll find the direction that that hopefully suits A, us, but B, the people that are going to listen to this podcast. So we're also reminiscing a little bit that about 12 months ago we were on the podcast. So for those who didn't listen or hadn't listened, I recommend they go back and listen to those. That's June and July 2023. A little bit of the Doug C. Brown background for the people's benefit before we jump into today's topics.
A little bit of my background?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I now feel honored again. You want to know something more about me? That's awesome. So I started working at the age of 3. And I worked for my dad's company. And I swept floors for 25 cents a week. And I thought it was amazing because, I got to work with all the big people and I got a shiny 25-cent piece at the end of the week. And, back then candy was a penny. So pretty much cut myself into a diabetic coma at the end of each week, eating all the good candy. And since I worked for my dad, I kind of caught the bug early about being an entrepreneur. And all the way through school, I started selling for him at the age 5.5, 6, and as did all my brothers. And I was always running side businesses. Even when I was in, like 10 years old, I was running side businesses through going through school. And then, I decided, I need to serve the United States government, the military. So I went into that. Frankly, to pay for school, to be honest with you, because, college here or university is so ridiculously expensive.
Yeah.
And, I did that. When I got out of the military, I decided, but even through the military, I had side businesses. So I've always had side businesses. I decided to, go to university. I did. I sold music equipment through university. I had a great time, Darren. I was able to work with some very powerful name brands in the music business. And I just continued to keep side businesses all the way through. And, most of them, frankly, were like multi-six-figure type businesses. But I always had money. You know what I mean? Like I had more money than I needed. And then I decided to get my degrees and go try that route in the hospital. I wanted to be a doctor. So I started out with nuclear medicine and got in the hospital setting. And I'm like, oh my goodness, this is a business. And it runs like a business. Now, I know maybe in other parts of the world, like, maybe in Australia or Europe or wherever, Canada, they're like, not here, right? It runs. But in the United States, it's a business. And if you could do 6 nuclear medicine cases a day, they wanted you to do 8. If you could do 8, they wanted you to do 10, 12, 14, and so on and so on. So I decided if I'm going to be in business, I should do something in business because I got in to help people and, in the medical field. So long story short, I decided, I've been kind of doing sales my whole life. why don't I try this in the corporate world? And I did. And I did really well. I excelled. I was the number one rep out of 330 something reps, if I remember correctly. And I made a lot of money. And I was like, I like this. And so that kind of led me on to my next step, which is I helped a guy named J. Conrad Levinson. He owned a book series called Guerrilla Marketing. And he introduced me to a guy named Chet Holmes, who wrote a book called The Ultimate Sales Machine. And I asked Chet's company if I could coach for them. And I did. And I quickly became their number one producing coach. So I was doing all this part time, but it was getting to the point where I was starting to compete. Like I was in my, I think my sixth or seventh month, I was making like $60,000 a month coaching
Yeah.
for this company. Well, I left the corporate world and never looked back. And eventually, I became the president of that company for sales and training. Tony Robbins companies came in and just one thing led to another. And then I've just been always building businesses. Then I built some seven-figure businesses and I was part of building multi eight-figure businesses. And then one actually grew from 68 million to 362 million and then was sold off for, a couple $1 billion down the line. Um, and so, yeah, that's kind of my entrepreneurial journey. I still today, I don't know why, maybe I'm a little crazy, Darren. I'm not sure, but I still today look and say, what can I do next? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, who can I help next? And how we ended up meeting really when it came down to it.
Absolutely, absolutely. So it's and I love that story. Nuclear medicine, sales, businesses, sweeping floors at three, selling from five. It's phenomenal. I always like to ask this question, and that is your perception of sales. So when you think of sales, what's your first thought?
Helping,
Yeah.
helping people, right? Um, for sales, some people that's, what is it, 5 letters, a dirty word, a dirty 5 letter word, right? Um, for me, it's always been about helping people because people generally have one or two things going on. Either they have a problem, so a problem today or a problem that's going to happen in the future,
Mm.
or two, they have an opportunity for now or an opportunity for the future that they want to capitalize on. And for some reason, I could see those when I was even a young kid. And, for those of you wondering, I'm an older guy now. I'm 62. I'm not real old, but actually, you might laugh. I had a mentor. He's in his 80s, and I said to him, I said, I feel like I'm getting a little older now. And he said, "You're just a kid." I'm like, oh, well, thank you. But when I look at sales or selling, it's really about helping somebody because we all want to get rid of problems
Mm.
and we all want to gain opportunities, whether it's now or in the future. So if I can be the person who helps that person do that, then it's a win-win for both of us, especially if I get paid and they get
Yeah.
paid, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that because I share the same approach because I always say to people that sales is the ultimate form of service. And at the core, what you're doing is looking for problems to solve. And if you can articulate those problems probably better than the person you're having a conversation with, they're probably going to allocate you as you must have a solution. So the natural thing is let's lean in and investigate that solution. But it's amazing how many people I speak to who are salespeople, and I ask the question, who likes to be sold to? Very rarely do people put their hand up. And that's why I asked
Right.
the question, what's your perception of sales? Because often they're under huge amounts of pressure to hit a number. So they become more about themselves and not about the prospect or the potential customer they're having a conversation with. So
Yeah, and
yeah,
if the reason that a lot of them are under huge amounts of pressure, based on my life's experience, Darren, is because they're not being master prospectors.
yeah,
They're trying to be salespeople.
yeah,
And so if we think about master prospecting, it's really figuring out who's our right fit client, right? The right fit buyer, and then creating numerous ways to have multiple amounts of leads, copious amounts of leads coming through that are not just leads, but they're qualified to
mm,
have sales conversations. And if we do that, then the pressure gets let off because it's really, it's in the numbers really when it comes down to it. And it's not sales is in the numbers. It's the application of the mathematics of the numbers that
Mm.
actually does it. So you could take a very easy, let's say somebody has a 25% close rate
Yeah.
and they're closing, 4 deals a month, let's say, and they're hitting quota. Well, if they want to exceed quota, they just have to close more. So if you look and they say, well, every four, people, I talk to four, I close one. That means they're talking to 16 people a month. And now X amount of lead flow comes in to get to that 16 conversations. If we just increase the number of reach outs and the number of connections and the number of responses, we'll increase the number of appointments.
Mm.
And so if we increase the number of appointments, and let's say we go from 16 to 24, now we're going to have 6 sales a month, right? It's that simple. So that's how I look at it. Pressure shouldn't really be in a sales capacity. And I understand I've had pressure too, and I still do today,
Yeah.
but it's really about creating lead flow to have more conversations and close more business and then create leverage in that process.
Yeah. And it reminds me a quick conversation we had before you press record. We were talking about how there's a small percentage, and sometimes it's quoted as 2 to 3%, where 2 to 3% of customers are really ready to buy or in the buying window right now, and which means that 95, 96, 97% perhaps are not, and you need to nurture it. And he said an interesting thing and said, well, I actually tend to disagree with that. And it's an interesting thing because it's often spoke about in a lot of different books in the sales
Yeah.
industry, if you like, around that, almost to the point where it must be gospel. Love your take on this because it points to what you've just spoken about, I think, in terms of knowing your ideal customer.
It really does. I mean, and here's the thing, like that quote originally was made famous by Chet Holmes, the late Chet Holmes. And I love Chet. I worked with Chet for 7 years as his president of training and sales. And and that would be like out in a cold market. You look at all the leads across, and at that time, 3% was the quoted thing, and everybody, you know, they quote it, so it must be true, right? But I always look at what's kind of the opposite view of this, like, and because when I ask questions like that, I usually come up with answers of some sort, sometimes not all good answers, but I do come up with answers. um and the answer that I came up with was, what if we were targeting sales qualified or sales ready leads versus targeting all leads?
Mm,
Would it be 3%? And the answer is absolutely no. It
mm,
would not be 3%. It is much higher. So the answer, and that's why I said, I don't disagree with Darren. I disagree with the concept of what, was put out there in the world. It's, because there's all, statistics can be a little skewed at
yeah.
times, or we believe statistics. It's like when a person goes in and the doctor says, geez, you've got this terrible disease, you've got a 3% chance at life, right? And they're like, oh no, right? But well, you still have a 3% chance globally. So now if we do some other things, you might have a better chance than 3%.
Mm,
But we don't want to believe that 3%, because if we do, then we're going to doom ourselves into an earlier death, right? And I know this from working in the medical field, because I've met cancer patients who have been alive for 14, 15 years when they wrote in their charts, will not be here in 4 to 6 months,
wow.
right? And I asked them why, because, I'm just that curious guy.
Yeah.
And they said, I'm not ready to die. I got too much to live for, right? That was the universal thing across. Don't listen to the doctors. They don't all know what they're talking about. Sorry, doctors. This was people telling it, not just me. So when we go for sales quality or sales ready leads, and we're focusing all of our prospecting efforts, all of our marketing efforts in there, then we're going to pick up higher quality, ready to purchase leads, and some of them are going to be purchase order ready leads, and they're going to
Mm,
spill into that purchase order ready category. So it'll increase the 3%.
mm, absolutely. And so with that, because there's a lot of salespeople who have big quotas and they've got territories and they said, "Hey, go and hit that quota," and they're sitting there thinking, "Man, how do I?" how do I do that? Because I've got a finite patch, right? And they're saying there's only so much blood I can get out of stone, Doug. So you're talking about sales ready leads and all these highly qualified leads. For salespeople that are sitting there listening and saying, "Well, I've only got a finite market. I've got a very niched area, and I've got a couple of clients like this that I'm trying to grapple with and work through in terms of their mindset and changing the narrative around from having the fixed scarcity sort of mindset into more of an abundance mindset."
Yeah.
Before we jump into, I guess, the new program about doubling your sales, are there any key, I guess, mindset shift that you work with or you've seen has had an impact when people are finding themselves in what others might think is a finite, scarcity-based area,
Yeah.
and how do they
Okay.
turn that around?
So that's a big question. I'm going to do my best.
Well, you are back for the third time, so we're going deep
Yeah,
on this.
that's true. Well, now the pressure's on. Thanks, Terry. So the answer is this. That mindset that's there, that scarcity and that belief set is something that happened usually over the person's lifetime. This usually started back when they were children.
Mm,
They might have heard things like money doesn't grow on trees, opportunities aren't abundant, you know, uh, eat your food on the plate because that's all we are ever gonna, it's like there's starving children out there across the world, and you should be grateful, right? Those type of
yeah,
things. And while I agree there's starving children out there, well, maybe we can feed them all,
yeah,
right? So that belief starts back in our childhood usually, or some type of thing that happened traumatically along our path of growth as a human being. And then we started buying into it and started repeating it and habituating it over and over and over and over. And once we do that, we give it value.
mm,
And that's where we hurt ourselves as human beings. I remember growing up, it was like eat steak and potatoes because they're amazing for you, and put real butter on there because that, is the greatest thing that you're supposed to have, like real butter. And then later on, butter's bad for you. Steak and potatoes aren't that good for you. Too many carbohydrates, steak, too much red meat, et cetera, et cetera. So instead of butter, use margarine,
yeah,
use this hydrogenated oil. It's much healthier. And then later on, it's like, no, this hydrogenated margarine stuff is bad for you. It's been linked to like bad things health wise, right? Go back to butter. It's like, and it's just constantly, things shift. If we look back over time, people believed one thing, found out wasn't true, believed that, found out that wasn't true, and believed something else, right?
yeah,
It's the same process. So the first thing is we've got to create awareness around what this is. What is the trigger levels that are going on that are creating that thought of scarcity? Because right out of the gate, my short answer would be, don't believe you have a finite market. You don't, right? You don't. It's probably, so the first question I would ask is what I'm believing, is it possible that it's not true, my
yeah,
belief?
yes,
And so if you have an inkling of, yeah, well, maybe, right? Because when you look at somebody else in that industry, they're generally someone's doing pretty well.
mm,
They're doing great in some capacities. So what are they doing that we're not doing? Because that's giving us some proof.
yeah,
So we've got to challenge the status quo of that belief. And one of the ways that of doing that, Darren, is when we believe something, we get a thought or a feeling first. Happens to all human beings. Imagine a Y. We're going up the Y, right? We start at the base of the Y and the Y
yeah,
forks off. Right at the beginning of that Y, there's an impulse. There's some stimuli that happens.
yeah,
That's a trigger. That trigger gets us to think or feel something. The moment we think or feel something, if it's something that we've been aware that is like not serving us, then we've got to interrupt that
mm,
immediately. And you can ask, hey, am what I'm feeling is it true? Or,
yeah,
hey, welcome, old friend. back you are. Let's talk, right? That gives the brain enough to interrupt the impulse to be able to go further up the Y without going down, let's say, the left side of the wheel, with the Y, which is non-serving village.
Yeah.
We want to go down the right side of the Y, which is proper thought lane. So we've got to interrupt that thought. And then what we do is we ask it questions. And that gives us enough time to kind of process what we want.
Mm,
So that's the short answer of that whole process, which is, how do we kind of, interrupt it? But then when you find out it's not true, the next question is, okay, even if I don't know what to do about this, who does?
mm,
Who might know this? Because I could say you got a finite market. There's probably ways of expanding that market that we're not thinking about.
yeah.
There's probably partners in there that are competitors that you could partner up with. They sell something, you don't sell it, et cetera, et cetera. There's probably people who serve that market. Like in my case, in the telecom business, I used to network all the time with people who sold phone systems or
Mm,
data, or wiring in buildings.
yeah.
And we, expanded my finite market because I had a territory too.
Mm.
So I just believe it's a mind shift that can happen, and there's kind of a short process around it. I mean, it takes a while to keep repeating the old habit, to get rid of the old habit and bring in the new serving one.
Yeah, because as you say, these habits and these beliefs are formed probably earlier in our life, and probably through people who were well-meaning, but they had beliefs that were also probably imprinted when they were young, and so it's the pattern complete.
Right. And it doesn't have to be traumatic either. That's what
No,
people think. Well, it's the trauma. Like I grew up in an environment, I openly tell people I grew up in an environment where good was never going to be good enough.
yeah,
Right. And I had, growing up, I used to study a lot of martial arts. So I had a lot of Asian friends. And then I realized that, man, if you got an A minus in a Chinese household,
look out.
you were basically thrown out. Right. I
Yeah,
mean, they were really, really on top of that. And here I am like with a B minus and I'm like happy. Right. And so the, but it was always like, okay, B minus is good, but it's never good enough, or B
yeah,
plus is good, it's never good enough. And it took me a long time to realize. Now this is how it manifests there. When I got into certain corporate jobs or I was into sales, right? That one that I became the number one rep, uh, in that whole company.
yeah,
I At one point I was like, I'm only 5'8". I don't have a head of hair, right? And at one point I was missing two teeth that they pulled out in my youth and then we couldn't afford to replace. And so I was like, how am I ever going to be successful here? Because I read an article that said IBM hires 6'2" Clark Gable type looking guys, and those are the most successful people. And then and my brain went, well, okay, I'm not that.
yeah,
But then I realized I was outselling all 9 salespeople combined on my team, and sometimes 3 teams across the region combined. And I was like, oh, my brain had to like process this. And then finally, one of my friends once said to me, what are you, stupid? Why do you believe that? It came from a paid advertorial in a magazine. They actually paid to place that ad, and it's called an advertorial. And he explained to me that's an article that they pay to write on their company. And it's like, look, they're trying to promote these people and get paid off that. And then that was like, oh, okay, now So remember, don't believe statistics, right? That type of thing.
absolutely.
So yeah, I think it's just one of those things that we all have to challenge the status quo and just keep doing it.
And it reminds me, we spoke on the last time we were together around the top 1% and what makes a difference.
Yeah,
How much of that 1% is what you just sort of articulated, the mindset, the belief
I
system?
would say more than half,
Yeah,
right? Because here's the thing about being in the 1%. If we keep raising our, let's say we're a commission salesperson, we keep raising our commissions and we're just killing it. Like, I mean, the CEO is your buddy now, and they're taking you out on trips and or you're in your own business and you're just maybe you're an independent agent for a company, or you have a company that is just going.
yeah,
we, if we're not careful, we will self-sabotage ourselves at one point. And we don't do this consciously. We do this unconsciously. I've done this several times in my life, and I've then caught myself. Um, and I've had clients and I've had friends who I've had to go to dinner with and go, Brian, what are you doing? Like, like, like you got everything. Your company just grew from like 7 million to 12 million and you're on your way to 20.
Mm.
And it's like you're doing all this weird stuff. Right. And so we get to the crux of it and we find out it is one of these invisible claws or these, what I call invisible blocks or
Yeah.
emotional blocks. And I'll speak for myself and not against Brian because I like Brian. He's a good guy. There was one time, Darren, I was making $500,000 US a year. Now, this is a time where if you went back and you monetized it today, it's probably more like $950,000 a year.
Yeah.
And I had my house paid off, my car's paid off. I had $500,000 in the bank, and I was never so scared in my life or stressed out. I was just so stressed, so scared. And I knew it was not right. I mean, I had beautiful kids. I had the house. We could buy anything we wanted. And I didn't worry. Even if I lost my business at that point, I could
Yeah.
just, whatever, I can live for 4 years, 5 years, whatever. Right. Um, but I was so stressed. And I lived in a major city outside of Houston, not a major city, but I lived in a city outside of Houston, Texas at that point. And I remember saying to my wife, listen, you know what? Something's wrong with me. And I can't figure it out. But here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go down in the inner city of Houston, Texas.
Yeah.
I'm going to walk around and I'm going to start complaining that I only have $500,000 coming in, $500,000 in the bank, that everything in my life is paid off and everybody's healthy and everything's good. And I said, I just want to see how long it takes one person to just punch me in the mouth or just, kick me around, right? Because I knew something was wrong. And so what I did is I went on a quest to figure out what it was. Right. And it turned out that I was good, but I was never going to be good enough.
Right.
$500,000 was never good enough. And who alerted me to this was Tony Robbins, actually, because Tony said to me, hey, I had a client one time that if he didn't make at least $2 million a year, he was a failure.
Wow.
And I'm like, back then 2 million was probably five now. So
Yeah.
I was like, whoa, I got the same problem. Right? So what if this wasn't true? Right? Start asking the question and then start
Yeah.
working through it. So yeah, it is extremely important for people. And that's why in everything that we do, we infuse this in everything we teach because I can give you the skill sets, I can give you the techniques, I can give you the strategies, I can give you the tactics. I can put it in a system for you and you'll get results.
Yeah.
But at one point, you might hit saturation, or worse yet, you become a real jerk to the
Mm.
people who are out there because I was telling you, Darren, that in one of our beta tests that we did for the W sales, right? The gentleman actually went from 140,000 in commissions to 2.1 million in commissions. Well, it was great financially, but
Yeah.
then he was like, I don't know if my wife's good enough for me. I don't know if this is good enough for me. Yeah. He bought into this like palatial place. He had like almost a 4,000 square foot place in downtown London. And he's like, oh, the doorman, he says the wrong things. And he was starting to be really mean to people.
Okay.
And it was all these triggers that were happening because he made way more money than he ever thought he was going to make. So it doesn't mean it happens all the time. Usually it magnifies what the insecurities we have.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's where it gets us into challenge mode. And I went to dinner with him one night and sat down and I'm like, dude, you're becoming a real, I won't use the word on the podcast. And he looked at me because, he viewed me as a mentor. And he said, well, tell me.
Yeah.
And I said, I'm surprised your wife's still here.
Yeah.
And and then for about 6 months, everything was good. And then he went back into the thing and his wife left. And then his business imploded
Yeah.
after
Okay.
that, right?
Yeah.
He got tossed out of the company that he was in because he was becoming so controversial and so combative with all the other team members that they were just like, we can't take this anymore. And they just let him go.
So you look at that and you think, well, and as you were talking, I had Jim Rohn's messaging just
Yeah.
going through. You got to work hard on yourself, then you got to work on your job, etc., etc. Is that a case of um, get into a position where you've got all the, I guess, all the sales skills and you've got the results coming in, but it's who you have to become as part of that process. So you have the responsibility that comes with that level of success and that level of responsibility. That if there's
Yes.
a bit of a disconnect, then you will go through this self-sabotaging process and you'll back to equalize.
It's well said. You'll come back to equilibrium. I remember when again, for those who don't know, I was Tony Robbins, president of training and sales for the business divisions of some of his companies. And I remember Tony always talking about a thermostat, right? It's like you will set your thermostat at who you see yourself at. And, if you're getting cold, then you'll kick on the heat and you'll get back to that number, whatever the number is,
Mm,
say 77 or something. And then when you go too high, you're at 84 and you don't change the perception of who we believe ourselves to
mm,
be, then we'll kick the air conditioners on and we'll bring it back to 77. So it is about expanding. Just you said it perfectly. It's about expanding into that who you must become in order to keep growing and receiving.
mm.
And the big challenge for most people, Darren, that I found through their life is they don't actually know who that is,
Yeah.
right? So people think when I get more money, I solve all my problems. You arrive at your problems with more style. I can definitely tell you that, right?
And a bit more comfort.
Yeah, and more confident. And you can hire people to do things that you can't do or shouldn't do, right?
Yeah.
Um, and that's part of also, letting go. That's part of the process. That was very difficult for me when I was growing, companies or divisions or whatever. I mean, when I had 166 people reporting to me at one point. Like you cannot do it all by yourself.
Yeah.
And in
Yeah.
business, you shouldn't.
Yeah.
Right? You're better off having 20% of a $20 million company than having 100% of a $500,000 company if you're looking for that level of comfort.
Mm,
You're
definitely.
also better off having a $500,000 company having 100% of it if you don't want all the employees and all of the things that are going on, or
Yeah.
somewhere in between that is right for us. So the first step is get clear,
Mm,
ultra truthful, clear about what do you really want? Because otherwise you will arrive at that goal and you'll go, and I have in my life too. So I don't want people to think I'm preaching, right? I
yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
I've made all these errors. Um, you'll arrive at that goal and you'll think like, huh, this isn't so great. I got here, but
This
it's
wasn't
like,
what I thought it was.
no, it's like, we build ourselves up to that moment, like, oh, when I get this goal, that it's going to be this.
Yeah.
And if we're not truthful about that's really what we want, we get to the goal and we go, eh, you know, so what? Like, okay, I'm here, but this isn't really what I was expecting. And
Yeah.
and worse yet, we don't celebrate it.
Mm,
Right. So what we're telling our brain is like, that was a long journey. Don't take more long journeys because, but it's because we're not clear.
yeah.
And when you are clear, then you'll know what it is. And so not just clear on the business side, but clear on the personal side, right? And
Yeah.
that's why you were asking how important it is. There's
Yeah.
always a business return on investment and always a personal return on investment that people buy.
Mm,
And whether we're selling to someone else or selling to ourselves, we still have the business return on investment and the personal return on investment in that equation, and we can't
yeah.
get rid of it because that's just how human beings work, right? We buy on emotion. We justify with logic, people say. I disagree with that too. We do buy on emotion, we justify on logic, but we justify the logic with another emotion,
That's right.
right?
Absolutely.
So
And when we look at that return, we tend to focus more on the business return because that tends to be more tangible versus maybe looking at the personal return because we may
yeah.
not necessarily like what we see.
and and when we're selling, I can tell people right now if they want to pick up their close rate, if you're just looking at the business return on investment and not looking at the personal return on investment and addressing that,
Yeah.
your close rate will be lower.
Yeah.
Unequivocally, it will be lower. And um, and I've made that mistake too. I mean, early on in my career, I was like, just focus on, hey, I can save you this kind of money, or hey, I can make you this kind of money, or hey, I can solve this business problem where you're having all this crazy stuff going on with your sales team or whatever. And, but the personal return on investment I missed.
Yeah.
And so I didn't close as much. And as soon as I learned, hey, and Darren, this is how it happened. I was sitting in front of a chief financial officer of a pretty good sized company. And I had worked out this thing where it would increase the profitability of the company, it would reduce the expense immensely across the board. Uh, and this was the second thing. The first one, I can also give if you want, but this was the second thing that happened. This was the trigger for me.
Yeah.
He looked at all the numbers. He went, "This is amazing." And he pushes the paper back across the table and he goes, "And we're not doing it." And I said, I'm like, I'm clueless because this is like millions of dollars.
Yeah.
And he said, I said, "Well, may I ask why you're not doing it?" He said, "We'll do it, but not now." And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" He goes, "We're going to wait a quarter."
Okay.
And in my head, this is like $1.6 million we're spending. Because if we just did it now, it's in the numbers.
Yeah.
And I said, "May I ask why?" He said, "Sure. If I do this, it will throw my numbers off this quarter and I will not get my year-end bonus." And I promised my family I was taking them on the vacation of a dream, and without that bonus, there's no dream. And without that thing, I'm going to have to tell my family, and I'm not doing that. There's the personal return on investment.
There you go.
Now, if I had ferried that out earlier or ferreted it out earlier, right? Then what I would have done is I would have addressed that and said, "Hey, why don't we sign the paperwork now, but we don't kick this in until first quarter because we have all of these things to do."
Mm.
And much of that would have been legitimate. It would have taken us a couple of months to actually get into play.
Yeah.
But what happened was fear kicked in on his side on the personal return on investment and goodbye deal.
Man, that is fascinating. And it just as you're talking, it says, yep, there's so many deals that go down that path
Yeah,
that it doesn't necessarily get revealed sometimes until after the fact. I mean, good on him for being so transparent and saying that.
right.
Um, and it would have been a high level of trust you would have built for them to do that. But yeah, that's a fascinating reason as to why people don't pull the trigger. Where logically it makes all sense. You think, well, why wouldn't you do this? You'd be mad not to.
Yeah. Yeah. I had a CTO do the same thing to me, and he didn't tell me originally. Um, it was a company called New York Mortgage Company. The company was called IndyMac Bank. They were a huge bank. And I was in the telecom business. So I found a way of really reducing their overhead in their technology. And this thing was dragging for months and months and months. And finally, I called him and I'm like, "What's going on? Like, this makes no logical business sense." And he literally said this to me. I didn't tell you this, Doug, but I'm telling you now, there is no way anyone in this company is going to sign that agreement. Because if we sign that agreement, I'm going to lose two people in my department who actually support me. So I'm going to have to work harder because they're going to realize that my budget in the department is not needed. And they're going to cut my budget, cut head count, And now I'm in a position. So I love you as a person, literally said this to me, love you as a person, but there's no bloody way this is happening.
Man.
Right. Now, the sad part about that story is about a year and a half later, that company, which was a huge bank, went bankrupt.
Right.
Right. Now, I don't know if what I did would have helped save the company, but the reality is, we must look at this personal return on investment, Darren, because if we
Yeah.
don't,
Yeah.
we just ice ourselves. It's like, just folks, if you're listening to this and you don't do the personal return on investment tomorrow, I'm going to anchor something. We're going to throw you into a pool of ice and leave you there for 40 minutes. And just imagine what that would feel like, because that's what's happening to your sales. You're getting frozen in that ice, and
Yeah.
you're just so it's really important to remember these things, and remember that personal return on investment means something to them, not what it means to us.
That's it.
And so we want to ask the questions around there. If we have enough rapport, Darren, they'll tell us anything.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's why doing business with those who you know, who you like, and ultimately who you trust can open
Yeah.
up a lot of different doors. And if we don't do that, if we don't lead with the problem solving and getting to know the person on a human level, we've got no real chance of actually selling the actual solution because we haven't hit that personal return on investment element, which
Yeah,
is really
and
cool.
that personal return could be all kinds of things. It could be anything from some of the stories you just heard to,
Yeah.
I want a better reputation in my market or better reputation in the company.
Yeah.
I want to get advancement,
Mm.
right? I want to protect my territory. I want whatever it is, right? And there's now, protect my territory is a personal return, but what we want to figure out is why.
Yeah.
So we want to become a 2-year-old again and ask those type of questions like, why, daddy? Why, mommy? Why? Why is this happen? Well, because this. Okay, and
Yeah.
why is that happening? Because of this. I
Yeah.
think I think I think Toyota did this study where they asked, I think it was 6 or 7,
The five whys?
yeah, whys.
Five whys, yeah.
Yeah, the 5 whys. Excuse me. You know
Yeah.
that better than I do, right? So it's the 5 whys. That's what it's called. And that's how they kind of looked at their marketing. Like, they asked these 5 why questions,
Mm.
and they found that it actually converts better. So if it's good enough, for them, why isn't it good enough for the most of us?
That's
Right?
it. That's it. Love it. Love it. So, Doug, we've spoken a lot about personal return on investment, triggers, beliefs, the top 1%. Love to wrap this up with a bit of a conversation on the program you've recently released, or you've been working on a little while now, around double your sales.
Yes.
Um, and I love the fact that I think you mentioned before we pressed record, or you maybe even said it on the recording, that your wife's a mathematician. So,
Yeah, she has a master's in math. She's talented in a lot of different ways, but this was something that I was like, "Whew, thank God I married her," because um, when I was putting the W sales methodology together, it's all based in mathematics. It's based in scientific mathematic research, right?
yeah,
Because I was looking for something that somebody could say, I want something reliable and predictable.
yeah,
And I want something that's, uh, measurable, right? So, but I wanted something mathematical because people believe math,
yeah,
right? I mean, that's how we got a guy to the moon, right? Or 2 men to the moon, it's how we do everything. It's math, right? I mean,
absolutely.
physics is based in mathematics. I mean, so I was like, well, why can't we apply this to something that's creative?
Hmm.
Because you can apply mathematics to music,
Yeah.
right? So why can't we do this with sales? And so, as I think I was telling you, Darren, it took me months to kind of figure this out. I was just going back day after day. I felt like kind of Einstein or Edison, doing the light bulb and going, oh, that didn't work, you know. And then I came up with something. I'm like, this looks logical. This looks like it actually works. But it was too simple. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? I was trying to complicate. And so then I took all of that and I went to my wife and I actually begged her. I said, would you please look at my math and tell me, because I know it's wrong,
Yeah.
because I'm good at flipping numbers in my head and doing sales math and things like that. But I know when it comes to putting formulas together and those things that I probably wasn't on target. And so I said, will you pretty please do this? And, you know, I'll go out and build this out in the yard for you or whatever. I mean, it was a trade-off of some sort, right?
I'll do all my
And
chores on the weekend.
exactly. And so we did, and she did. And when she looked at this and she came back, she said to me, I'm glad I married you because not just for my good looks, I guess, right? So
And your
it's
charisma.
in my charisma. Thank you, Darren. I'll send that $300, I promise to. um, but I had at the time 8 core metrics. And then over time, I adapted it into 12. And I don't have any additional metrics. It's like these are, the 12.
Yeah.
And so she put all the mathematics in behind it. And we started running this and we realized, oh my goodness, as I thought, if you do these in sequence, they compound like interest,
Yeah.
like
Okay.
compounding interest.
Yeah.
And you get this huge leverage out of these 12 metrics. And then once you have the metrics, we create the growth plan. And once we create the growth plan, we launch the growth plan. And then we're working on these metrics, but we're training on, what we call high performing activities in prospecting.
Yeah.
The ideal right fit buyer. We're dialing in all these skills as well, conversational sales conversion,
Yeah.
massive follow up around the process. And all of these things, including all the mind things we were talking about, right? So there's 6 components to this process. And we started running it out and people were just getting off the charts results. And it was like, oh my goodness, this actually does do what I thought it would. And it's predictable. So if
Yeah.
you want, just to grow by 12%, that's okay. It's personal goal, right? If you want to grow by 38%, no problem. You want to grow by 127%, no problem. We can show you in the formula how to do this.
Hmm.
Um, and so there's those 12 core metrics that are around there. And when we do those 12 core metrics in the right order, and then we optimize those metrics, which is what I did on the back end for, companies most of my life, then, magical things seem to happen. And you work a lot easier, I can tell you that.
So without giving away all the secrets, what are some of the key metrics that you think? And I know you
No,
said
I'll
they're
give
all in
all,
order.
yeah, I'll give,
Um,
I'll give all 12. You want all 12?
sure.
Yeah. So I got a finite market, right? Right. Um, so if we increase the number of reach outs in that market, and then we increase the number of connections, we increase the number of responses to those connections, positive responses to those connections. We increase the number of appointments. We increase the number of closes. We increase the number of follow-up closes. We increase the transactional value of each transaction. We increase the repeated purchase rate of that particular client. We increase the lead quality of that client. Or the overall lead quality. We increase the number of referrals that we're getting out of it. We increase different market size shares, like going after a larger
Mm.
percentage, say, of larger clients. Some people would even call these whale hunting clients,
Yeah.
right? And we increase the speed to close and we work on these metrics and we dial them in. And the cool part is, Darren, is you don't have to dial them in and like get monumental gains in these things. We're talking a percentage point here and there.
Yeah.
It will stack. Just like if we took a penny a day and we started doubling that penny a day,
Yeah.
by, I think day 8 or whatever, we got $1 or something, by day 30, we got 5,000,000, hundred and
Huge.
something $1,000 a
Yeah.
day coming
Yeah.
into the thing. It works just like that. And then once we got it, I was like, all right, let's put it in an application to make sure it works. And, we've, like I told you, we had companies of all sizes. We want to go from 3.5 million to 6 to 10 million
Yeah.
quickly. We had the gentleman who went from 140,000 commissions to 2.1 million in commissions. We had someone in marketing who was selling $15,000 clients packages. In their second month, they sold a $315,000 month not a month, a total annual
Yeah.
package, right? So we had all kinds of things that were happening from all different size companies. But it's not in the numbers, it's in the application of the mathematical formula of the numbers when applied appropriately.
Yeah. And when you talk about like the number of reach outs, number of connections, there'll be a lot of organizations that have a bit of a hybrid model in terms of they have a lot of inbound marketing, they have a lot of outbound
Yep.
marketing. Do you have the metrics that sort of correlate with that, or are you thinking that we've got to have more control, therefore we've got to control almost like the narrative and therefore more of the outbound?
Well, so you can increase the number of leads with a static close rate, whether it's inbound or outbound, and still increase your revenues.
Yeah.
Okay. So, as a CEO of a company, I would look at it and say, okay, what's our profitability? Like if we triple our leads and we triple this, um, do the numbers make sense? But
Mm.
from a salesperson's perspective, it always makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Because, unless we're doing something like whale hunting, which is very expensive to go after a particular client. But the
Mm.
reality is that, there's always an expense to the sale, and we help people figure out what that is per sale, and
Yeah.
then we can look at the numbers, right? So, but if we increase the reach outs, you know, whether it's inbound or outbound, then the metrics will still work.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of salespeople doing outbound,
Yeah.
right? Because if we're not doing outbound and inbound dries up, it's like having referrals as just one, piece of the
And
overall
you're sitting there
plan.
waiting for the phone to ring.
Yeah, I mean, look, what happened during the pandemic,
Mm.
right? Um, we grew during the pandemic because of what we were doing and talking about. I mean, we literally almost doubled the company through the pandemic,
Wow.
where many other people were trying to figure out, what are they going to do?
Mm.
But in down times, always, always, always push the pedal down on market share.
Yeah.
Always. Because what happens is most people pull back.
Mm.
And when they pull back, there's a bluer ocean out there to swim in at that point. And so, make do, make it count while you have the opportunity. But so yeah, the inbound and outbound. But again, what we want to do is, also we're going to be looking at the lead quality, right? We can have the same amount of leads, but if we increase the lead quality
Yeah.
by, let's say, 5%,
Mm.
makes a huge difference in the actual number of positive connections, number of positive responses, number of appointments that come in, assuming that we have good messaging, which is why we need to dial in
Yeah.
the ideal right fit buyer and all the stakeholders and how to message to them.
Mm. And you got to have obviously a good product, a reputable product, a good service, and know what you're offering. So you got to be really clear on that. And when you're throwing all the stuff around mindset we've spoken about today, it should actually enable you to use maths, use science to actually be a bit more predictable in terms of the results you're going to deliver.
Yeah. And that's the thing. I mean, look, nothing has ever changed, amongst the times that I've started or you and I have, talked over time, right? Which is if we're not playing win-win,
Mm.
you shouldn't even be there.
Yeah.
Right? Because if we're just out, so like in some of our assessment questions that we pose to companies, it's like, are you selling at any cost, or are you actually trying to resolve challenges and promote opportunities for people, right?
Mm.
Because if it comes back that you're just selling at any cost, what's going to happen is you make money,
Mm.
but you're burning so much off that your profit is far lower than it needs to be, and your sales expansion is going to be far lower than you could have it. And it never ceases to amaze me when we just adjust some of these things that the dialing it in on these metrics. I mean, that's Darren with Tony, with Tony Robbins and Chet Holmes in that company. I mean, I did segmentation and dialed in the leads.
Mm,
And so when I dialed in the leads, we literally took the close rate of all of the team and it went from 17.8% to 43.2% with no
wow.
additional budget whatsoever,
Yeah.
right? By just aligning the messaging with the right offers and segmenting that process out and getting more positive connections and more positive responses led
Mm,
to far more appointments.
mm.
So it's just, it works.
Love it. Love it. So, mate, I'm conscious of time. It's in the evening now for you. Question for you: people wanting to know more about this particular program or learning a bit more about you and connecting with you, where is the best place for them to do so?
Yeah, well, since I was coming on here for the third time, I figured I have to do something amazingly special. So we created this thing called the Ultimate Attraction and Sales Conversion Guide. And really, it's what every person who sells usually higher end products or
Yeah.
services one-on-one, having one-on-one conversations, what they must know. So I would like to give that to your audience, and if you're okay with that.
Yeah, please.
And you can go, folks, you can go to, ceosalesstrategies.com / the word guide, GUIDE. So, www.ceosalesstrategies, plural,
Yep.
/ guide.
Hmm.
And if they want to get a hold of me directly, they can send me directly an email if they want to, Doug at ceosalesstrategies.com. They can hit me on LinkedIn at Doug Brown 123. Or, if they want to pick up the guide, they can. There's lots of resources here that they can get for free. There's lots of things that they can learn. And then, we also have our offerings that, if they want to do that too, which is,
Yeah.
a paid option, we do that as well.
Nice. Nice. Very generous, my friend. And as always, these conversations are filled with wisdom. And I always walk away from these conversations with you, Doug, and just reinvigorated, right? And some of the perhaps beliefs that I have have been challenged as well. So I want to thank you. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, I'm glad I can serve. So thank you. I appreciate, who knows? Maybe I'll get a chance to get back the fourth time next year. We'll see. By the way, folks, that's called pre-framing.
That is, it is a free frame. I love it. Love it. So, Doug, as always, absolute pleasure to have you on the show. Again, you've delivered huge amounts of gold nuggets there, and yeah, thank you so much, and keep up the great work. And it's great to speak to you again. And happy birthday to your to young daughter, 25, Rebecca. She just
Yes,
happened to
yes.
turn
Thank you.
25 not long ago, a couple of weeks, I think, wasn't
Yeah, it was just like maybe it was in September, but the end of September. What are we in right now? In the beginning of October, right?
it?
So yeah, it was like less than 2 weeks ago. I don't know about all the other parents out there, but I know when your child turns 25, it's kind of like a weird feeling for me, Darren. It's like,
Yeah.
but then I remember my mother saying, my oldest brother, she said, it's really weird that when I have a son that turns 65 years old, I mean, he's 9 years older than I am. And I'm like, oh my gosh, yeah. It's like what that must feel like, right?
Yeah.
So, and she was like, I never thought that day would ever come, and then it's like, well, he's probably going to be, the way she's going, she's probably going to be 75 and then she'll be saying the same thing. So,
Brilliant, brilliant. So, Doug, hey, again, thanks so much. Keep up the great work, and you never know, that pre-frame might actually work. We might see you back on the podcast for number 4.
I'd love to be here. I always enjoy talking with you. So thank you, Darren.
Brilliant. Thanks, Doug. All the best, mate. Thank you for listening to the Exceptional Sales Leader podcast. I trust the information in this episode has been helpful in your journey towards becoming exceptional. And remember, please take the time to rate the show, subscribe to the show so other people can find it. But also, if I can help you, jump on my calendar, go to leadwithdarren.com and let's have a conversation about how I can help you along your journey to being exceptional.